The Trail, Chapter 16. I set up a cutting board on the kitchen counters and get to work while Jake hauls out frozen balls of ham to defrost. Then he sets a soup pot on one of the stove burners and pours a quart of olive oil into it from a 2-gallon jug. He switches on the propane flame, and I dump chopped vegetables into the soup pot when my cutting board fills up. Soon, the air is filled with the sound and smells of hissing, cooking onions. Jake adds some frozen minced garlic, then fills the pot with water, pours in a few gallons of beans, and sets the stove flame low. Before he puts the lid on, he drops a handful of metal spoons into the pot. Keeps the soup from burning, he tells me. Now, we let that simmer until dinner. Meanwhile, want to make some oatmeal honey bread? Jake digs into the fridge and pulls out a 3-pound bag of industrial yeast. He held closed with a bright green plastic clothespin. He asked me to measure out a half cup of yeast into a large bowl, and then add a generous dose of honey, a handful of salt, and some carefully measured warm water. I watch the yeast form little bubbles as it gobbles up the sugar and the honey. My mouth starts watering as the soup's delicate smells waft or flow through the kitchen. All of a sudden, a wave of homesickness hits me. I want to be back in Gran's kitchen, smelling soup on the stove. Hey, you okay? Jake's looking at me curiously. I nod. Yeah, sorry, I was just thinking about how my grandma would have loved this kitchen. Jake smiles and pulls out 22-gallon rolling bins from underneath a stainless steel island. One bin contains oatmeal, and the other is full of flour. He measures out 16 cups of flour, while I measure out 10 cups of oatmeal, and we dump them into the bowl. Jake kneads the dough just until it holds together, then flours the island and upturns the dough onto it. He splits the dough in 2 pieces, and nudges one of them over to me. And now comes my favorite part of baking, he announces. Kneading. Jake shows me how to work the dough, sliding his fingers under the bottom of it and lifting and folding it in half and using the heel of his hand, or the inside of your hand, heel, to push the dough back onto itself. I can see why he likes it. There's something soothing about the rhythm of kneading and how a sticky mess of unformed dough and time and care and patience and work transforms into a silky round ball. Once the dough is smooth and elastic, we transfer it back onto the bowl and let it rise while we make dessert. Jake decides on chocolate brownies with mint icing. He melts chocolate and butter while I beat together confectioners, sugar, and milk with a dash of peppermint extract. Before long, the brownies are in the oven, and we've gone back to the oatmeal honey dough, dividing it into 6 pieces and tucking them into oiled bread pans. We let the bread rise a second time while we pull the brownies out of the oven. Once they're cool, we drizzle the icing over them. After a round of dishes, the bread goes into the oven, the kitchen is shipshape, and Jake and I are ready for a sit-down. Before our break, we go outside to see how Moose is doing. He's fast asleep under the porch. He's earned a nap. I give him a gentle pat and tiptoe back inside. Jake leaves out a little bell at the front desk for guests to ding if they need help, or if they need him, and we head upstairs to the crew quarters. At the top of the steps, we reach a dark, tiny landing and duck through a hobbit-sized doorway. Ooh, reference to The Hobbit. Crew rooms are off limits to guests, and I feel like a VIP or very important person as I enter a sunlit room filled with traces of current crew and crews past. Handwritten notes, photos of people doing handstands on hut roofs at sunset, drawings of elephants on skates and clowns riding unicorns, a poster of Han Solo, awesome, marked up with pink hearts that float around his face, plus a number of battered road signs only hint at countless stories that the crew must have been part of and created over the years. Jake picks up a Calvin and Hobbes comic book. Oh man, this like page is full of really good references. Jake picks up a Calvin and Hobbes comic book and settles down on the top bunk bed one of 5 beds in the room. There's a hammock rigged in the center of the room, and I sink into it. Very cool. Lucas would have loved this. He would have been asking a million questions, starting with pink hearts around Han Solo. I start to ask Jake about the Star Wars poster when something else catches my eye. What's that? I ask, pointing to a cup of spoons. It's perched below a window that opens up into the dining room and has a few coils of fishing line wrapped around the cup handle. Jake looks up at from his comic book. Oh, it's a booby trap. Have you ever heard of a night raid? I shake my head. Night raiding is a time-honored tradition of sneaking into another hut in the dead of dark and stealing as many special objects as we can without getting caught. If you take a look at the hut dining rooms, you'll see objects that the crews have collected over the years and hung up for decoration. Road signs mostly. Some of the objects are more coveted than others and are often booby-trapped to make them more difficult to steal. Like what? Well, back in the 1950s and 60s, the prize item was a human skull that had been smuggled out of an abandoned lodging camp. In 1969, a Cessna plane crashed on Mount Washington, and its front propeller made it into the huts, though it's disappeared a few years back. Jake scratches his chin. There's a stuffed pink boa constrictor named Vicky. A megaphone taken from Rutgers University. Ooh, New Jersey. He nods at the cup. Take a peek at where that fishing line goes and tell me what you see. I hop out of the hammock to inspect the cup. The fishing line is almost invisible. I trace it out of the window and down to the handle of a weathered rowing oar hanging in the dining room wall. An oar? Yep, that oar is one of the special items. It was used in the Olympic Games in the 1970s. Right now, it's the most valued raid item in the huts. If someone tries to take it down, they'll trigger the fishing line to tip over the cups, spilling the spoons and waking us up. There's also a row of spoons hidden behind the oar, so even if the fishing line is cut, there would still be a ruckus if the oar is moved. Jake grins. Every once in a while, guests get hit with the falling spoons, but they're generally good-natured about it when we explain its purpose. Jake returns to his comic book, and I go back to the hammock. I pull a blanket over myself and fall asleep to the smells of baking bread and cooling brownies. Really, really well-described chapter.